BBOR Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia. BlackBoxNid88 on Instagram for the bonus podcast. And welcome to BBOR, the home of true crime talk radio and your premier destination for unsolved mysteries, criminal psychology, and exploring the dark side of cyberspace. My name is Ned DeHaan, and I am your host, as well as the creator of AstroPsych 400 here on YouTube, and regular contributor to the Zodiac Killer channel. And a great way to support these shows is just by listening to some more content. But you can also go over to Amazon.com and have a look at the book Killer on a White Horse, written by me, Ned DeHaan. It is a novel, murder mystery, inspired by the Zodiac Manson connection, but it is indeed fictional. However, who doesn't love a good mystery? And there is always the TeeSpring page. Feel free to check out some of the merchandise. And remember, being weird is not a crime. Let the show begin. This episode of Black Box Online Radio is brought to you by Rep Sports and Raze Energy. Are you a fan of energy drinks, protein shakes, and health foods? Well, I sure am. I use the stuff almost every single day. They sell Raze Energy products at my local gym, but you can have them shipped to your home. Use the coupon code NED075, that's NED075, for discounts applied at the checkout. The link is in the description box. Okay, hello everybody. Today is Friday, another Anything Goes Friday. Welcome to the show. First, I would like to give a big thank you to everybody who listened to the recent episode on the Long Island serial killer. I now have several episodes out about that case, and every Wednesday over the next couple weeks or months, I'm going to be doing an episode on the Long Island serial killer, and of course, there is always Zodiac Mondays here on this channel, so if you haven't subscribed yet to Black Box Online Radio, I would invite you to do so you can follow along with all of these true crime cases if you're curious. And yes, indeed, this is the Anything Goes Friday, where any subject is fair game. Back in 2020, I learned that Stephanie Harlowe, the true crime YouTuber, had a 6-part series on Charles Manson, and I started following along with those and doing some responses here on BBOR, because firstly, I simply wanted to know what she had to say. I was curious her take on the subject, but because I was doing a daily segment on BBOR at the time, I just wanted to follow along with each episode, but I only did 4 of them, and I really felt like I hadn't completed the series, so last week I did a response to Part 5 of Stephanie Harlowe's 6-part series, and today will be my response to Part 6. But if you haven't heard any of the previous episodes, that's fine, you can keep listening. I always want my multi-part discussions on this channel to be available as standalone episodes as well. You can listen at any time throughout the recordings, jump in the middle, jump to the end, all is okay. But in 2020, as well as last week, I began with an icebreaker question that was simply unrelated. And the one that I used last time was, what is the accomplishment that you're proud of that no one else would care about? I actually have a very big icebreaker question for you guys, and I learned about it from the channel Marvelous Work on a Wonder. A lot of you regular listeners will know that I follow their material, and they have a new program out called Zeitgeist of Real Truth. And they asked a challenge question to the audience. How would you feel if you could discover a cure for cancer, but you could never, ever claim credit for it? And I would like to read your responses down in the comments section down below. What is your response to that question? How would you feel if you could discover a cure for cancer but never claim credit for it? Because my first thought immediately was, oh yeah, absolutely, I'd still do that. Of course I'd do that. You would save millions of lives. So what? Who cares about the credit, right? No, not would you do it? Because that's not the question. How would you feel about it? How would you feel that you will do something that is amazing, an amazing scientific discovery, but maybe someone else is taking credit for it? Maybe it's just simply unknown. And then I was thinking, yeah, I'd still do it anyway, and I wouldn't feel bad at all because anytime I had a conversation with somebody, I could always brag about, oh yeah, I made this brilliant scientific discovery, and if I actually did it, I could show them how, and I could walk them through all the steps if they didn't believe me. But then I thought about the question a little bit more, and I was like, nope, that's still claiming credit. It doesn't say get credit, it says claim credit. I always try to be as literal as possible. And I really began to think about it, and I thought, yeah, I'd feel bad. I'd feel like I was missing out on something, or I would feel underappreciated. Would I still do it? Absolutely yes. But there would be part of me that always felt like there was something that I deserved that I wasn't getting. And this was totally set up by the Marvelous Work in a Wonder channel. They're trying to show that even if we have good intentions, we can also have elements of greed and pride, and we have this type of lust for the spotlight in all of us, even if it's for something good, and even if we're mostly trying to do things in a good way, we can still desire something in a self-serving way. And I completely follow what they're saying, but at the same time, if you have the chance to cure cancer, absolutely still go for it, credit or. And now to move on to the story of Charles Manson. As I said, I have several other episodes about him on this channel, and there is a playlist for these direct responses. But in August of 1969, the world experienced the Tate LaBianca murders, an absolutely horrific crime, one of the most famous murder cases in American history. The murders of Sharon Tate, as well as Wojtek Frykowski, Abigail Folger, Stephen Parent, and Jay Sebring. Those are frequently referred to as the Sharon Tate murders or the Cielo Drive murders. Then there are the Waverly Drive murders, or simply known as the LaBianca murders, where Lino and Rosemary LaBianca were murdered. Lino LaBianca was said to have made his money in the supermarket business, and his wife, Rosemary, was said to have been very good with investments, but some people talk about how they had connections to some type of underground illegal operations. I don't even want to speculate too much, but there is a reason why that they were targeted. And Charles Manson said in his own words in an interview that Lino and Rosemary LaBianca had to die because they were in possession of a black phone book that had the names of all the people in the music industry. And when I was watching Stephanie Harlowe's episode number 6, I always pay attention to when people are talking about the motive for the Tate LaBianca murders. Why did these crimes happen? Because some people simply think that it was a drug deal gone wrong, that someone was burned or cheated out of drug money. Other people think it's because Charles Manson was just very angry about not getting a record deal and he really wanted to be a famous musician. So he sent his people, rather, to that house to murder an individual named Terry Melcher, but Terry Melcher was not in the house anymore. He didn't live there anymore. And then other people say that, well, Manson obviously would have known that. And Stephanie Harlowe did bring up a quotation from Susan Atkins, and Susan Atkins, one of the people who was convicted for this, when she said that they wanted to commit a crime that would shock the world. And I think that that is absolutely tying into the conventional narrative that it's not like some drug deal gone wrong, or it's not just that the Manson family is falling apart and they needed to do something to solve all their problems. They wanted to commit a crime that would shock the world. And when I was watching an interview with Charles Manson once, I believe it's actually the Ronald Reagan Jr. interview, he said that Lino LaBianca had to die because he was in possession of a black phone book that had all of the numbers of the music industry. And another one, he said that the people in the Cielo Drive house had to die because Terry Melcher broke a contract. And I think that they had knowledge that Terry Melcher was not in the house, but it's just that committing a crime that would shock the world in retaliation and revenge for, well, Charles Manson not getting a music deal. And also, there's a story that they brought a mobile recording studio to the Spawn Ranch where Charles Manson and the family lived, and they were doing drugs with 3 people who brought the mobile recording studio, and one of them just absolutely tripped out. He had a very bad reaction to the drugs, and he went after Charles Manson with a hatchet, and in one story it actually says he grabbed a pitchfork, but he tried to murder Charles Manson because he was saying that Charlie was the devil, and Bruce Davis and another member of the Manson family had to subdue the guy, and he said that Charles Manson was very bothered by that and viewed that as a personal attack, and wanted, again, some type of retaliation. There are lots of theories about why the murders were committed, and there isn't a very clear motive to this day. But if you simply look at just what that quotation from Susan Atkins could contain, they wanted to commit a crime that would shock the world, and then the LaBianca murders happening the next night, okay, they were in possession of a black phone book, but then they can also try and make it look like someone else is responsible. But when I was watching Stephanie Harlowe's video, she said very clearly that it took a while for the authorities to connect the cases together. And there's one person who is at the Sharon Tate murders, but not the LaBianca murders, and her name is Linda Kasabian. And she becomes important because she didn't really know Charles Manson and the family that well, especially not Charlie, but she would go on to become a witness for the prosecution, given full immunity, and she was mostly serving as the lookout for the Sharon Tate murders. And there's a story out there that Linda Kasabian was only there because she had a valid California driver's license. I don't know if that's true, because I even heard once that California didn't put the pictures on the driver's licenses until the early 1970s, and the murders occurred in 1969. I'm not really sure. But there's this famous story that they've stolen items from one of the murders, and they went into a quote-unquote African-American neighborhood, and Linda Kasabian is supposed to drop them in a restroom so that people will find them, and then they're going to draw this connection, thinking that African Americans were responsible for the Tate LaBianca murders, mostly the LaBianca murders. And I even heard the story once that they actually ate watermelon and left the watermelon rinds in the sink to make the authorities think that these crimes were committed by African Americans. But what Linda Kasabian did was she put the stolen items into a toilet tank, like just lifting up the lid and putting them in there. And when I followed the Tate LaBianca radio program hosted by Brian Davis and Tana Laufenberg, they brought up the question, like, how on earth would anybody ever find stolen valuables in a toilet tank and then connect it to any type of crime scene? They were speculating that, number one, Linda Kasabian may have been stashing them there so she could come back later and use them for her own personal good, like she was just trying to steal them and ruin the Manson family plan, even though it wasn't a very good one. And the second one is that Linda Kasabian may have had some type of romantic relations with another man, maybe even Tex Watson at some point, and they have all types of theories, so these people are forming alliances, and it's really got to question these things about how in control are people, because the alternative theorists are always trying to make it seem like, number one, Charlie is the mastermind, but at the same time, oh wait, no he's not, that's just the public facade. And I think Stephanie Harlowe did a very balanced presentation on this. I mean, I would just ask you guys this. Do you think that Charles Manson was an actual mastermind, or is he just someone who has been misrepresented by the media? And when I said Stephanie did a balanced presentation, it's more as if they were putting on an act. The Manson family was putting on an act that they were brainwashed. Were they actually brainwashed? No. Because what Stephanie said was that there's this story where the Manson girls are in the courtroom, Leslie Van Houten, Susan Atkins, and Patricia Krenwinkel, and they get so distracted that they have to be given colored pencils and paper so that they can draw and doodle and color. And then later on, though, Leslie Van Houten begins to have regular conversations with Stephen K. From his mother, the ADA, and still, I believe, still is an assistant district attorney to this day. And he just thought it was so remarkable how he could have level-headed discussions with this member of the Manson family. And Stephanie Harlow's response to all that was simple, that, well, that's because they aren't really childish, they aren't really brainwashed. Were just trying to make people think that yes, indeed, they're clear-headed, level-headed, clear-thinking, balance-minded individuals, and they were just sort of putting on an act and a charade, and they never let it down. And we're talking even 50 years later, and they're in prison, and they're still trying to sing the same song. I mean, some of them have passed away. For example, Susan Atkins passed away. Of course, Charles Manson also passed away. But the ones who are still alive are still all about it was all Charlie's fault or it was the drugs. But if I understand what Stephanie Harlowe tried to share, it's that the Manson family were much more in control of their mental faculties than they let on. And I mean, did they ever believe this stuff at all? And I think that the final lines in episode 6 of Stephanie Harlow's series were very telling because that's when she actually brings in a lot of her own commentary and analysis, simply saying that, okay, it's one thing to get caught up with drugs, it's one thing to get caught up with a group of bad people, but once it gets to the point where you have to bring a knife and go to a different location to commit a murder, then why weren't they drawing the line? Why wasn't the role of a conscience coming into play? And she also brought up the point that no matter what, we will never know if these people would have gone on to commit murders without Charles Manson in the arena, because she said that perhaps Tex Watson or Susan Atkins would have definitely hurt somebody at a particular time, and there are a couple reasons for this. Susan Atkins came from a very troubled background, but that's still no excuse for murder, and she was just very insensitive about the whole situation. And it's really in part 5 when Stephanie talks about how Susan Atkins likes to run her mouth simply nonstop. She just likes to go on about the murders, and she also had lots of conflicting stories. At even one point, she says that she stabbed Sharon Tate. Then she says no, she didn't stab Sharon Tate. And then one point, she says she drank her blood, and all of these conflicting accounts of the events. And I even have a whole episode on this channel called "The Lies of Susan Atkins," just to highlight that simple concept. But it's an important one that she has a lot of stories that are all over the place, and not all of them could be true. But there's a rather fascinating episode of The Maury Show, like "You Are the Father," but when Maury was actually doing other subjects than whatever garbage television he did for the last 15 years, when he just did the whole show about Susan Atkins. And it was just a really interesting choice for a discussion. Should Susan Atkins have been given parole? And they interviewed Stephen Kay, they interviewed one of her ex-husbands, and of course Susan Atkins' attorney, but as an attorney, she's on Susan's side. And the what it comes down to is, yes, Susan Atkins was a very malicious individual, and she really showed no remorse. And there's even that very famous interview when she's talking about the victims, and she said, "Oh yes, that man. I think his name is Wojtek Frykowski." It's like, what do you mean you think his name is Wojtek Frykowski? It's been 7 years after you murdered him, and I mean, just not even that complete awareness of you are responsible for the deaths of other people in an illegal way. And maybe she never comprehended that because, of course, they wanted to be released, all of them. Tex Watson, Leslie Van Houten, Susan Atkins, Patricia Krenwinkel, Bruce Davis, all of them. They wanted to get out of jail. They don't want to be in jail forever. Who would? But that is what it becomes the focus of. And when you listen to interviews with members of the Manson family who are still behind bars to this day, they're just like, oh, I've been cheated. I need to be let out. I'm no danger to anyone. Therefore, I should be released. And it just becomes like there's some type of injustice against them. And they blame Charlie and they blame the drugs. I take full accountability for it, but it was the drugs. And Stephanie Harlowe brought up some interesting points about Tex Watson. In part 5, she mostly called him a runner, or just someone who wanted to always flee the scene, but she brought up some testimony from someone who knew Tex Watson when he lived in, well, Texas, and he was saying that there's no way Tex was involved with this stuff. He had great parents, he grew up to be like this all-American guy, and the response I thought was rather fair and honest. Well, yes, his parents were good people, but Tex did horrible things to the LaBiancas and the people at Cielo Drive. He savagely attacked them and mutilated their bodies, absolutely committed heinous murders. And there was even this one episode. What was it? It's the one where they're doing the parole hearings and they're talking to Sharon Tate's sister, but she's talking about the reasons why Tex should stay behind bars. They just simply refer to Tex as the man who actually killed all of those people, and definitely he should be found guilty for all of those murders. But it definitely goes to show you that Tex had mental instability issues of his own, partnered with the fact that his brain was altered because of drug use, and he was high on drugs at the time of the murders. All of those are not excuses, and that's no excuse for committing murder for that same reason of having a conscience. And it simply just goes to illustrate the point that he was out of control, he was responsible, but Tex was also someone who could have lived a different life, but some destructive tendencies all came together. And we had a comment that came in last week about why do people have this type of fascination with the Manson family? And I think Stephanie Harlowe tried to answer that in her episode, even though, of course, I mean, this is a response to that happened recorded afterwards. But she talked about how the Manson family is just a perfect storm of all of these destructive tendencies coming together. And I completely agree with that. But on the note of guilt and prosecution, there's one person who I haven't really talked about too much in this series, and that is Lynette, also known as Red, also known as Squeaky. And I was going back through some of the interviews that she had done with I believe it's a radio show, but uploaded here on YouTube called Church of Rock, where she was promoting her book Reflection about the Manson family, as well as also the attempted assassination of Gerald Ford. Lots of trouble committed by Squeaky. And there was, I was really trying to find the exact clip where she says that her name is actually pronounced Squeaky Fromme, not Squeaky Fromme. Everyone calls her Lynette Squeaky Fromme, which has a nice name to it, but she said her name was actually pronounced Fromme, foam with an R and me, and you'll hear that sometimes in some other commentators' boxes, but I think that that's all beside the point. In these interviews, though, that she was doing to promote Reflection with her, promote her book Reflection on the Church of Rock channel, she talked about how there's a lot of misinformation out there about the Manson family, and that is the biggest reason why she wanted to write the book and tell it her way, but she encountered issues trying to make the message available to the public, mostly because, in her own words, no one wants to believe that something didn't happen, and people were just latching onto the most outrageous aspects of the Manson family, and they were going with it, no matter what it was. They were just believing it without not even the desire to fact check it. And on the one hand, I am completely guilty of that because, yes, I'm curious about outrageous ideas. But on the other hand, in the true crime world, we do have to go toward the truth. But some of the examples that Squeaky provided were that she was trying to write out her story, and then the publisher's like, there's not enough sex in it. And then she even wrote a short story version of this once, and some of the editors changed all the words in it, taking out the word children and just substituting the word drugs. They're trying to make everything just sound more salacious and over the top, and they were genuinely manipulating the narrative to try and increase readership. But in short, that's just blatantly lying. And she just talked about there's all of these abuses of the concept of editing, and they're trying to jazz things up, and the language is all manipulated. But when I was listening to Stephanie Harlowe's channel about the Manson family, it really seems like Squeaky was someone who just got off squeaky clean, right? No, she's just absolutely filthy. And the amount of illegal activities that Stephanie talked about in part 6 are just astronomical. Squeaky would have been involved with witness tampering, harassment, threatening people. Threatening to genuinely have people murdered and if they didn't go along with what the Manson family wanted. And I think a lot of people expected that type of behavior. Never mind that it was all illegal, absolutely illegal, but those weren't the things that she got convicted of. And another point that Stephanie brought up in her video was that there's another member of the Manson family named Mary Brunner, whom I haven't talked about a lot yet. The first woman in the Manson family, perhaps some people would think of her that way, and she's actually present at the murder of Gary Hinman, but does not get convicted of it. So, that's another way that somebody escaped everything. And some people simply think that Mary Brunner was a CIA operative who orchestrated the whole thing, and that's why she's in jail for credit card fraud when all of these things are going down. I certainly cannot prove that. I'll always listen to somebody's theory, and so many people think that the Manson family was created by the CIA, that this was all a CIA plot to destroy the hippie movement. And no matter what, though, whether you believe that type of conspiracy theory or not, in this episode 6, Stephanie's talking about all the ways that that message was shared with the nation about people with long hair who do drugs and listen to rock and roll are bad. The media is just running wild with that story about how this image of Charles Manson with his long hair and scruffy face on the cover of Life magazine, how that just comes across as a bad image. It's destroying the hippie culture. And there was even what was it the movie Charlie Says with Hannah Murray that says that the 60s ended in August of 1969 because of the Tate LaBianca murders, that this whole peace, love, and joy, flower power, summer of love movement that was created ended because of Charles Manson. Is that really what happened? I don't believe that for a second, personally. I think that that's just media manipulation, and these types of popularity and trends and these types of fashionable movements probably would have been altered to some effect in their own right. If especially when you're talking about one that's fueled by music, one that is fueled by political shifts, because a change in government or a new president could easily have altered the course of events. But one point that is much easier to criticize and analyze is the fact that the Manson family members who did not get convicted for the Tate LaBianca murders were absolutely up to no good. And Stephanie Harlowe also told the story of how Ruth Ann Morehouse even gave someone a hamburger that had 10 tabs of acid in it, and that was supposed to be a message to scare the person into not testifying. And they are all these types of illegal activities. That's just poisoning, let alone witness tampering and coercion and intimidation. And I think, though, that the overall thesis of these 6 episodes, as I said, I've watched them 2 years apart, but that is that Charles Manson knew a lot more than what was going on. And I definitely do remember some of the stuff from the early episodes when Stephanie was talking about how he was influenced by Stranger in a Strange Land, he was influenced by L. Ron Hubbard and Scientology, and he learned how to talk in that sing-song type of way. And I think Stephanie even raised the possibility of, is Charles Manson just talking in circles and other people are projecting their own story onto him? I've been watching some interviews with Charles Manson recently, and people are just still absolutely gung-ho for this guy. I don't know if gung-ho is the right term. Maybe they get all googly-eyed when they're looking at him and they're just writing these, little love letters in the comments section. Oh, wow, he is such a great philosopher. What a truly great philosophical mind. And if I can follow what the whole L. Ron Hubbard sci-fi connection is that, well, he learned how to manipulate people because it's quite possible that Charles Manson was a born psychopath, And I had the opportunity to interview a neuroscientist once for this channel. I did an episode called The Neuroscience of Serial Killers, and we began talking about Charles Manson. And what she said was, her name was Christina, the neuroscientist I talked to, and she said Charles Manson is perhaps a very clear example of a clinical psychopath. His brain was examined, his neurotransmitters were practically functioning backwards. So that was doomed from the beginning, partnered with all of the abuse that he would have experienced from his mother being in prison, being humiliated by his uncle, and just having unstable people in his lives, spending the majority of his time in reform schools and then, in prison, doing all kinds of terrible things. And that whole concept of how a psychopath or a sociopath is geared toward manipulation. I frequently bring up the interview that I watched with a guy from SBSK when he talked about how he was an example of a clinical sociopath, and he said that it really started for him around the early preteen years when maybe in the fourth grade, I think is what he said, when number one he thought about how people would jump up and down when they were celebrating, and he began to wonder that why are they jumping up and down? That doesn't change the event that has happened. Okay, you had a victory, but jumping up and down and cheering doesn't affect the result of the victory. And the second one was that once he began to become familiar with someone, he just tried to manipulate them. And even in his adult years, it was something that he couldn't get out of. And with Charles Manson, I absolutely see a lot of that in him. The emotional disconnect, the attempts to provide some type of hypnotic way, or just not giving straight answers, or just making people think something on their own, like, I'm just the mirror. You're looking at yourself when you look at me, when he's just talking in a confusing way. And yes, it sounds a little bit poetic, but it worked. Now, is this a product of the prison system and indoctrination, and is this the stuff that the CIA is trying to actually create? I don't know, but I definitely get curious about it. And Mae Russell was also talking about this in the 1970s because I did a three-part series called Zodiac Killer: The Linkletter Connection, which I would invite you to listen to here on this channel. And what Mae Russell's saying is just these crimes that occurred in '69, the Manson murders and the Zodiac Killer, they are a product of people that were created by the system. And I think Charles Manson is saying some very similar things. But recently, I had the opportunity to watch an interview that Charles Manson did with a French, either documentary or a TV station. It was only about 5 minutes long, the clip that was uploaded. Most of it was in French with English subtitles, but when, of course, Charles Manson's doing the interview, he did that in English. And the interviewer is asking him about he's in jail because he did something wrong, and he said, no, I didn't do anything wrong, my friends did something wrong. And then she says, but you were the mind. And he said, oh, I was the mind, I was the mastermind, I should be in jail because I told somebody to do something. And I think at that point he actually admitted that yes, he did order the Tate LaBianca murders, and I don't believe he ordered it directly. I mean, I even said this in the last segment. It is my guess, it's not like I was actually there or anything, but it's my guess that he may have said something to the effect of, take care of business, do whatever you feel is right, go into that house, say you're the devil and you're here to do the devil's work, and then do what you want to do. Because there's a very frequent phrase that is used by Charles Manson in his interviews that he did while in prison, and that was, I didn't tell anyone to do anything other than what they wanted to do. And in some of his later years in life, he would say things to the effect of, don't ask me about this world. I don't live in this world. I didn't live in that world, meaning that he lived in his own mind. And one point that was brought up in, it was on the Tate LaBianca radio program, is that Charles Manson was diagnosed as a schizophrenic in 1963, but that was almost certainly an erroneous diagnosis. And on TLB radio, they even gave in their whole their whole reasoning about why they thought that was an erroneous diagnosis and getting other statements from doctors. I can't really comment too much on that because I'm not a doctor myself, but it definitely seemed like Charles Manson had some type of pre-existing mental condition well before 1969, well before meeting any members of the Manson family, partnered with the fact that it's highly possible that he was a clinical psychopath who was abused as a child. And as Stephanie Harlowe said, this is all just a perfect storm of terrible events coming together. But when you look at something like TLB Radio, a weekly segment all about the Manson family, let alone the fact that the case is mostly solved and mostly all of the perpetrators have been identified, let alone we actually know about these other stories. As I said, Squeaky is witness tampering and harassing people and threatening to kill Stephen K. or something to that effect, and Ruth Ann Morehouse is poisoning somebody with a hamburger. Why is there this fascination? And my own personal response to that is that it seems that there are just so many people involved, and we know the names of them, like Susan Atkins, like Ruth Ann Morehouse, like Leslie Van Houten, like Patricia Krenwinkel, although I don't think a single person in the world likes her. I'm sorry, Pat. But, I mean, we know who all of these people are, but one person, though, that Stephanie Harlowe talked about in her episode, a member of the Manson family, that gets really, really downplayed is Bruce Davis. And I've talked about this so much on this channel about how there are all these sentences about how Bruce Davis is there. Bruce Davis is a participant, but they just ended at that. Okay, well, yeah, Bruce Davis did this. Or you can read stuff like in Paul Watkins's book, My Life with Charles Manson. Oh, yeah, they had to go pick up Bruce from Malibu. Oh, yeah, Bruce is on a mission going to England. And he flees for a while, and then he comes back, and all of these things. What really is Charles Manson's right-hand man about? And, of course, Howard Davis, no relation, wants to try and vilify him as being the Zodiac killer. But I think that is mostly a wild story. However, I'm definitely curious about some of Howard Davis's observations in regards to Bruce Davis and psychology, saying that Bruce was the most evil member of the Manson family. Bruce Davis was the person that was even more feared than Charles Manson, and I'm so tempted to believe that that was true, because I don't think anyone gave a rat's ass about Paul Watkins, and that's why he had to hype himself up. I can comprehend some things that I learned from Stephanie Harlowe, nonetheless, about Tex Watson, that he wasn't always the right-hand man, but he adopted the role because, well, his brain got fried on drugs, did some belladonna thinking it was a sweet potato, and turned himself into a moving school bus. Beep, 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 it was the sound he was making. Okay, but Bruce Davis is always just in the shadows, and that just creates this cause for suspicion. That just creates this cause for doubt, and I'm so tempted to think that these rumors about him are true. I mean, he had a very I was about to say detailed, maybe not extremely detailed, interview, though, that he did with the BBC that is available here on YouTube, and he sounds rather level-headed in his elder years, and Bruce Davis went on to father one child in prison. I believe he had a daughter, but don't quote me on that, and it seems like he just adopted the whole model prisoner, convert to Christianity, and try to get out of it. But with Tex Watson, he actually fathered 4 children in prison, wonderful conjugal visits. But that brings us to a certain point, though, with the activities of the Manson family. One reason why I don't believe any of these alternative theories about how it was a drug deal gone wrong or it was a prostitution deal gone wrong. 50 years in prison, and you would think that somebody would just broken their silence. There was some type of alternative motive and confessing. Even if you're not going to get out of jail, what on earth do you have to lose? And maybe that's just how people on the outside would function. Maybe people who have mental disorders in jail would kind of go to the contrary and just be like, whatever, I don't care. And some people think that Susan Atkins took all these dark secrets to the grave about the true motive for the Tate LaBianca murders. Well, what if they didn't? Like, what if they didn't? What if it's just as simple as they wanted to commit a crime that would shock the world, and they were familiar with the house on Cielo Drive because they had been there before? They had learned about it from Terry Melcher, nonetheless, but it was just that if Charles Manson isn't going to be a rock star, it's not necessarily about driving fear into the heart of Terry Melcher, but just shocking the world, just showing the world that they're more powerful. And I really have some trouble believing that the Manson family were actually under Charlie's spell to the point where they thought that they were actually going to enter some type of enchanted city, or they're actually going to find it in a bottomless pit in the desert, and that they're going to grow their numbers to 144,000, and there's going to be an upcoming race war, so they have to write Helter Skelter and Blood on a Wall. All of these wild stories. I don't really believe that those. How could anybody believe that stuff, even to the point where they would actually carry it out? Now, did they feel close and bonded with one another? Sure. But much as Stephanie Harlowe said in her episode, if if you're actually brainwashed to that level, you shouldn't be able to snap back into it and have level-headed conversations with Stephen Kay the way that Leslie Van Houten was. And I do need to bring up one point about Leslie Van Houten, who was not present for the Sharon Tate murders, but was present at the LaBianca murders. And Stephanie Harlowe was talking about how Leslie Van Houten's attorney was making the case that Leslie was not a participant in the actual murder of Rosemary LaBianca. She only participated in the stabbing to do some type of gesture for the Manson family, and all the wounds that she issued to Rosemary LaBianca were post-mortem. But I again think that that's one of Stephanie's most brilliant observations, saying that there's no possible way she could have known that she was stabbing Rosemary LaBianca post-mortem, because she didn't say anything about checking her vitals, and she's not a medical doctor. But I was shocked that the attorney would actually use that as a defense to the jury, because, as I understood, if someone is an active participant in a murder, then they are still a murderer. Like, they're still found guilty of murder. Like, even if someone is just acting as the lookout, then they can be found guilty of murder. Not always, but they can be found guilty of murder. Usually that's a second-degree murder and so on. If someone is just involved in a robbery and that turns deadly, well, that person gets charged with murder. This sounds more like first-degree murder, but that's the whole reason why Linda Kasabian was given immunity. So when she testified for the prosecution, she was given immunity. Well, from what? So she doesn't go to jail because she's just a lookout. That's still illegal, and no matter what, that is counted as being an active participant, an accessory to murder. And it's all about how the lawyers sell it, but I just thought it was very odd that Leslie Van Houten's attorney would try and present that to the jury, because that just seems like a doomed to fail type of defense. And I guess it was, though, because Leslie Van Houten spent the majority of her life in prison. I believe she was let out on bail for 6 months for a period of time. I really don't know the specifics on that, but then she ended up going back to jail. So, of course, the ultimate conclusion is Charles Manson was found guilty and sentenced to death, which was then commuted to life in prison. So were all the members of the Manson family on trial: Bruce Davis, Tex Watson, Leslie Van Houten, Patricia Krenwinkel, and Susan Atkins. And in conclusion, and if I ever misinterpret some of Stephanie Harlowe's comments, I apologize, but I believe she said something to the effect of, they were all guilty. Not just the Manson family members that I listed off, but all of them. Everything I said about Squeaky and Sandra Good and Mary Brunner and Ruth Ann Morehouse, they were all guilty. They all had active participant roles in these crimes, and to some effect, and it is quite saddening. And I mean, what do you really think? If you have any comments about the Manson family, I would love to read them down below. You can share anything you want in the comments section, and I will definitely maybe even use some of them in a future episode. Thank you so much to Stephanie Harlowe for creating these episodes, and this series is finally complete. 2 years in the making. Okay, maybe not 2 complete years, but started in 2020 and ending in 2022, and if you're listening to this in the future, future events such as these will affect you in the future. Alright, well, anybody can write this show at BlackBoxOnlineRadio at AOL.com. You can also get me on Facebook. My personal Facebook is in the description box, as well as BlackBoxNid88 on Instagram. And I will see you over there for the bonus podcast. Until next time.